Retirement should be your reward for decades of hard work, not a time of financial stress. But I've seen it far too often. Smart people making simple mistakes that quietly cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars in their retirement. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the most common and most expensive retirement planning errors I've seen as a financial advisor and how you can avoid them to make sure they don't impact on your retirement negatively. Now, the first one, and I see this all too often, is the idea that people give away too much money too soon. Now here I'm referring to the bank of mum and dad or gifting money to children. The generations before us in general have instilled us with a desire or a responsibility almost to ensure that the next generation had it better than we did. And I can assure you right now, they already do. Yes, interest rates are high and yes, property prices are high, but so many other parts of our lives are much better than what previous generations have experienced. Now I'm not against people helping out their children and their grandchildren. Rather, I'm against doing so blindly and without considering the trade-offs and costs of doing so. The evidence I've seen, and there's a book called Die with Zero that's worth reading if you're listening to this video. The evidence it shows that there's a much higher impact of giving presents sooner in someone's life when they need it, as opposed to past your death when most people are established or on their own kind of life journey and it just becomes an additional benefit to them as opposed to something that can change their life at the current time. Too often I see retirees being too generous and most importantly to their own detriment. I've seen families hold on to second homes or holiday houses, which cost tens of thousands of dollars to keep up to date, let alone the time involved in taking care of them, simply because their children may want to use them again in the future, despite having not used them for decades in some instances. But there's this emotional connection and this hope of keeping things together for children, which in most cases, the children don't know the sacrifices that you're making to do so. And the key here is that sometimes people are giving up a very comfortable lifestyle today for the hope that someone else will benefit in the future. And maybe it's time to be a little bit selfish when it comes to these things. Similarly, I've seen people gift large amounts of money to children or entire properties or big deposits, which represent a significant portion of their wealth, despite only being early in their retirement journey and not necessarily having enough assets or not being confident around the level of assets that they have will last their own lifetime already. Again, this is impacting on today at the expense of tomorrow. There are many ways to give in my experience, but I think the key here is that you need to be informed, you need to talk to someone and consider the trade-offs and not just blindly provide these gifts, which seem like something you need to do and you have a responsibility to do, but they can impact your lifestyle and your retirement significantly. Now, the second one, and this might be controversial too, is I've seen too many people staying in their house for too long. The government is now incentivizing people to sell their homes sooner and release equity. And honestly, I've seen it that many times before. This can transform your retirement depending on what your financial position is beforehand. What I've seen all too often though is that there's an inability for people to look beyond the next 3, 6 or 12 months and consider the fact that their property, while they have lots of historic memories and great memories in there, that it may not be suited to them 12 months, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. And in some cases, it can be better and a massive potential benefit to their current lifestyle by making that decision sooner as opposed to being forced into making that decision. The fact is the value of property in Australia has continued to increase to the point that it represents the largest asset that most of us have if we're lucky enough to own a home. Now, one thing I've seen, which is quite interesting, is that there's no limit on how much your home can be worth and still get an age pension. So in some cases, I've seen people with $2 or $3 million homes and still getting an age pension because they don't have any other assets. But in a lot of cases, and you're obviously determined by what the age pension is paying, in most cases, most people want the flexibility and the control over their own destiny, which means if you were able to release that equity, yes, you'd lose the age pension, but there's so many other options to generate a passive income, something we've covered in other videos. I've seen quite a few people spend a significant portion of their retirement savings on renovating their home, ultimately giving up more travel or a better lifestyle to have a nicer home for a period of time. I'm not saying that any of these are bad decisions, but again, we need to consider a home like anything else. Downsizing can free up tasks like gardening, cuts lots of expenses and selling your holiday house or something similar, and they allow you to change your life and have more flexibility. Similarly, from a health perspective, living in traditional multi-level homes, as a lot of us are, can be riskier and riskier as we age. The third mistake I want to talk about is a continual one that I see, and that's people underestimating how long they will live. We've covered this in prior videos, and the comments will show it. The average retirement now lasts as long as 20 to 30 years, if not 35. The intergenerational report said people in their 50s will live comfortably beyond 90. A paper delivered to British Parliament said 50% of people born after 1971 will live to 100. The ABS says the current life expectancy for those is 81 for men and 85 for women, and that's the ABS, which is always historic data. It's actually increased significantly from 67 years for men to 81 at the moment and 72 to 85 for women. But what we're actually seeing, and this is something that's been shared with by Beck Wilson at Epic Retirement, is that the mortality adjusted life expectancy is more like 92 or 93 for a woman, and actually more for a couple. Now, your parents might be dying earlier if you're looking at retirement now, and they may only be living into their mid-80s, but it's going to change significantly. So an extra 7 to 8 years on top of that for the current generation. And I think the key here is that underestimating how long you'll live, you will either have too much money or run out of it. And I think this is such an important thing to keep considering. We are healthier than we've ever been, able to travel for longer, which means we're going to spend more money than we ever have. Why does it matter? Because if you know you have 30 years to invest in retirement and to live in retirement, you can think differently. You can lock money away for longer periods. You can model more appropriately. You can have more certainty about what you can spend each year. And you can also be more patient when it comes to your investments. The fourth thing I want to talk about is overestimating how much you will need. And this is another all too common mistake. I blame it on the industry and a lack of access to good financial information. Too often I meet people who continue working well beyond when they need to, mainly because they think they can't afford to retire. One part of this is about not understanding how much capital you have and what this will produce for you. There are plenty of rules, little backstops you can use, like the 4% rule, which talks about you can safely withdraw 4% of your assets every year and see that continue to grow, or the 6.5% rule, which says you can do a 6.5% drawdown based on what your current assets are. I think the second part of this is failing to understand that the way you invest can drastically change what your retirement income could look like. I mean, a lot of people who come in and look at their neighbours and think they need $100,000, $120,000, $150,000 to retire. And so many times they forget about the tax, that if you need this much in your normal marginal tax, you need to earn something like $150,000 to get $100,000. You can actually pay no tax in retirement. In my experience, most retirements need around $60,000 to $80,000 as a base level. And then the choices beyond this are up to the individual. Renovations, new cars, travel, different levels of travel, different places of travel, caravans, four-wheel drives, all those sort of things come into it. And the choices add up. So it's important to understand how much you're actually going to spend. Do a nice detailed budget. We'll have a resource for that available in the next few weeks, and be very clear and don't be afraid to look at what you're spending and how much that might actually last you. Now, the next one I want to talk about is the risk, and what I see as a big mistake is being too conservative with your money. All too often, I see people doing what's comfortable or what doesn't take much thought. Cash rates are high, I hear, so I'll just hold that and I'll be fine. I'll just put money in a term deposit. But you have $1 million invested at 5%, and we just saw inflation at 2.5%, then you only have $25,000 left after inflation. So the cost of living is increasing. If you're drawing $75,000 a year, that will only last a maximum of 20 years. And we know that your retirement could be 30 to 35 years. And that's only if interest rates stay where they are at quite high levels compared to the last 10 years. Now, an interesting stat here is that if we look at Telstra's lifetime income calculator, you can see a huge difference in how much capital you need to generate the same level of income if you take a different level of risk. So for this comparison, we're looking at a 30% growth portfolio versus a 70% growth portfolio. So almost more than double the amount of growth assets. For a single person that needs $60,000 retiring at 60, you actually need $105,000 less if you invest into the more growth-oriented option. For a couple at an income of $84,000, you need $115,000 less. For a single person that wants $100,000 in retirement and retiring at 60, you need $185,000 less if you have a 70% growth portfolio as opposed to a 30% growth portfolio. And for a couple who need $140,000, it's $190,000 less in savings and super that you need. Another part of this, the same goes for property, or feeling like the market is overvalued and choosing not to invest at a given time. Even when we know that what happens is if we try to time the market, we miss both the best days and the worst days, and we're significantly worse off. The second last thing I want to talk about is not engaging with your superannuation assets. Outside the home, superannuation is our second biggest asset by far. A rising tide has lifted all boats in the past, with falling interest rates boosting the value of every asset we've got. And every super fund was doing well regardless of how big they were or how they were investing. But divergence, so that's the difference in returns of all different types of super funds, has grown massively in the last few years. And the best and worst funds are a long way apart. If you're in a bad one or an average one, you may be missing out. And 1% a year, which is in some cases the benefit that a financial advisor can provide, if not more, is significant when you think about 1% on $1 million compounded every year. You need to engage with the super fund, and this is the most tax-effective entity through which to fund your retirement income. Now, Div 296, which we've cut in another video, and the constantly changing rules around superannuation aside, they will keep changing, but it will remain the best place to put your retirement capital by far. Importantly, you need to be contributing and you need to be tracking what your super fund is doing on a regular basis, and also looking at how much you might be able to rely on in income from the balance that you're accumulating, because that may give you the flexibility to retire. And the last one I want to talk about is too many people chase the next hot thing when it comes to retirement. And this may be well and good when you're accumulating and you can save more money, but this just doesn't work once you hit retirement. You've got a finite pool of capital. If you want to be a self-funded retiree, your focus needs to be on not blowing it up, as opposed to finding the next hot thing that doubles or triples or 10 baggers in a short period of time. The most scams and biggest losses of capital always come from greed, whether that's in the form of tax deductions or short, hot money returns. Be it crypto, share trading, quick returns, there is always where money is lost. And similarly, the same happens on share markets. Thematic ETFs come and go, and they always have a great story to tell. But there is no simple equation that gets this to work for you. Retirement, in my view, is all about resilience and resilience of that income. Make sure you're building a portfolio not to predict the next crisis, but to ensure you aren't wiped out by it. It's all about probabilities and risks, and not necessarily just getting the best return every single year. Small caps, lithium, property, mining, high dividend plays, AI, the list goes on, and there is a new one every day. So once again, thank you for watching, and thank you for sending your feedback through and commenting. Please give us a thumbs up, follow the page, and reach out at wattlepartners.com.au if you have any questions or would like to obtain financial advice.